In 1981, a strange arcade cabinet was said to have appeared in Portland, Oregon. Players said it made them sick. Men in black came to collect the data. Then the machine disappeared. Arcades were not nostalgia yet. They were noisy physical spaces, packed with kids, coins, glowing screens, and machines many adults barely understood. Cabinets lined the walls. Each game had its own sound, its own rhythm, its own small crowd. Outside those rooms, many adults looked at arcades with suspicion. Video games consumed time, money, and attention. They pulled teenagers into dimly lit spaces, often without much supervision. For some, they were a loud new fad. For others, something more unsettling. In the early 1980s, it did not take much for a rumor to grow. A boy leaving an arcade pale and sick. A long session in front of a cabinet. A headache after hours of lights and movement. A new machine appearing without explanation. A sudden inspection inside a local arcade. Each detail could remain isolated, or become part of a larger story. The legend of Polybius would grow from that exact place, where entertainment became suspicious, and a young technology began to look capable of something beyond the game. Portland, Oregon, November 1981. Inside the Malibu Grand Prix Arcade in Beaverton, near Portland, a 12-year-old boy stands in front of asteroids. His name is Brian Morrow. His goal is precise: to stay in the game long enough to enter the record books. The session goes on for hours. Then, through the night, around him, people gather to watch. Kids, spectators, curious visitors waiting to see how far the attempt can go. After 28 hours, Morrow stops. He has stomach pains. He is exhausted. Later accounts also mention the soft drinks he consumed during the attempt. The episode does not end in tragedy, but the image remains. A child in front of an arcade cabinet for more than a day, pushed to the edge of physical endurance. Around the same period, another story is often linked to that same arcade. The name is Michael Lopez. According to later reconstructions, Lopez had been playing Tempest, one of the most visually intense arcade games of those years. Abstract graphics, bright vector lines, geometric tunnels, rapid movement. Tempest was built to trap the eye inside shapes that never stopped changing. Lopez reportedly suffered a severe migraine. Then the story became stranger. He is said to have left the arcade and later collapsed on the lawn of a stranger, unable to keep walking home. For adults, these could be separate medical episodes. A boy overexerting himself on asteroids. Another boy suffering a migraine after playing Tempest. But for kids hearing the story afterward, the explanation could become simpler and darker. One arcade, one room, one screen. Something in there had done something to them. 5 months later, that fear found a much more serious case. Calumet City, Illinois. April 3rd, 1982. Peter Burkowski is 18 years old. Around 8:30 in the evening, he enters Friar Tuck's game room with a friend. He begins playing Berzerk, an arcade game released by Stern Electronics in 1980. Within 15 minutes, he earns scores high enough to enter his initials on the machine's leaderboard. Then he steps away from the cabinet. He takes a few steps toward another game and collapses. By 9 o'clock that evening, Peter Burkowski is dead. The story reaches newspapers with a simple and terrifying formula: a young man dead after playing a video game. But the medical picture was more complex. The autopsy found scar tissue in his heart, already present before that night. Deputy Coroner Mark Allen said the stress of the game may have acted as a trigger in a heart that was already vulnerable. He also made clear that Burkowski could have died in other stressful situations. But the place where he died was an arcade, and that changed everything. After the collapse, reporters arrived at Friar Tuck's, filmed the cabinets, and interviewed players. Berzerk became the name attached to the death because it was there, switched on, close to the spot where Peter had fallen. From that moment on, the idea of a video game capable of causing harm no longer belonged only to playground rumors. It had entered the news. But arcades were not entered only by kids, managers, and machine technicians. At times, investigators entered them too. Reconstructions of the Polybius legend often mention inspections and raids in Portland area arcades during those years. The concern was practical. Modified cabinets, illegal gambling systems, hidden counters, altered machines. But from inside an arcade, the scene could look very different. Panels came off. Circuit boards were examined. For a few minutes, the game stopped being a game and became evidence. On December 9th, 1981, state, local, and federal agents raided several bars, lodges, and arcades in the Portland and Beaverton area. The investigation concerned machines allegedly modified for gambling, with counters and hidden systems used to track plays and illegal payouts. To anyone watching, the difference between a gambling investigation and something more secret would not have been obvious. That was enough for imagination to do the rest. Years later, coinop.org preserved one of the most famous details of the Polybius legend: men in black coats checking the cabinet and collecting records, not coins. The source remains anonymous. There is no verifiable name. No arcade identified with certainty. No document proving that such a cabinet existed. But the detail works because it rests on a real atmosphere. Arcades being watched, machines being opened, and official inspections that could look far more mysterious from the outside than they really were. In the same period, another reported case showed why the idea could sound less absurd than it should have. In Seattle, federal agents were said to have used arcade cabinets fitted with cameras and microphones during an undercover operation. This did not prove Polybius, but it made one idea harder to laugh away. An arcade cabinet could be used for surveillance. At a certain point, inside this story, a name appears: Polybius. It was not a normal arcade title. It did not sound like a space shooter, a maze game, or a cartoon cabinet built to attract kids with color and noise. It sounded older, colder, almost academic. Polybius was an ancient Greek historian, concerned with evidence, testimony, and how events should be judged. The name also points to the Polybius square, a method for encoding letters into coordinates, history and code in the same word. For a legend built from anonymous fragments, missing evidence, and supposed secret data, the choice almost feels too perfect. Maybe it was intentional. Maybe it was added later by someone who understood exactly how to make the story feel deeper than a normal arcade rumor. Or maybe that is why the name works so well. Because it turns a missing video game into something that feels like a message waiting to be decoded. According to the legend, the cabinet appeared in a handful of Oregon arcades in the early 1980s. A dark machine, hard to identify, placed among other games without advertising, flyers, manuals, or clear commercial traces. Those who speak of it describe it as strange from the beginning. On the screen, there were supposedly no characters, no recognizable levels, no familiar setting. The most common versions describe geometric shapes, luminous lines, rapid movement, and abstract images, something closer to a visual test than to a normal arcade game. The player had to follow the screen, react quickly, and stay focused. Then came the stories about the effects: nausea, dizziness, headaches, insomnia, nightmares, confusion, memory gaps. In some versions, players returned to the machine even after feeling ill. In others, they lost interest in other video games completely. The cabinet was not remembered simply as rare. It was remembered as something that followed the player after the game was over. One of the strangest details concerns the supposed manufacturer. In the online versions of the legend, the name Sinneslöschen appears. It is often loosely rendered as something like sensory deletion or erasure of the senses. The German is not clean, and that may be part of why it feels invented. There are no solid traces of a real arcade company with that name. The story always moves in the same direction. Polybius appears. Players gather around it. Rumors spread. Then the cabinet disappears. After that, only weak sources remain. Arcade memories, online pages, anonymous comments, and reconstructions that surfaced years later. None of them is enough on its own. Together, they gave the legend a recognizable shape. A machine that appeared briefly. A game described as too intense. A name difficult to forget. And then the void. After years of stories, the question remains simple. Where is Polybius? Most arcade games eventually leave some trace behind. A cabinet, a circuit board, a manual, a flyer, a photograph, a maintenance record. With Polybius, no original machine has been verified, no reliable period photograph, no independently analyzed authentic ROM, and yet the legend continued to grow. Coinop.org became one of the central points of the modern myth, not because it proved Polybius, but because it fixed many of the details people would later repeat. Portland, 1981, strange effects on players, men in black coats, Sinneslöschen, and the idea of a ROM that never led to a verifiable artifact. Even the images connected to Polybius remain uncertain. Modern reconstructions, visual hypotheses rather than original evidence. Its visual mythology can resemble real games from the period: Tempest, Asteroids, Battlezone, Star Castle, or Cube Quest. But resembling something from 1981 is not proof. Polybius did not truly enter public history in 1981. It entered circulation much later, through databases, archived pages, forums, gaming magazines, and retellings. By then, the cabinet was already gone from the real world, if it had ever been there at all. What remained was more adaptable than an object. A story that could be copied, updated, doubted, believed again. In 2006, a man using the name Stephen Roach claimed to know the origin of the game. His version described Polybius not as a government experiment, but as a commercial test that went wrong. The claim did not close the story. In 2009, Coinop distanced itself from him and mentioned a possible key of lead. It produced no documented conclusion. Before looking for a definitive answer, it is worth looking at the machines that really existed. In the early 1980s, some arcade games already looked strange enough to unsettle anyone outside that culture. Tempest, Battlezone, and Cube Quest offered tunnels, vector landscapes, and abstract imagery that could feel cold, mechanical, almost experimental. For regular players, they were the future of arcades. To outsiders, they could look like something else entirely. Memory does not preserve everything with equal force. A visual impression may survive better than a title. An illness in one arcade may merge with another rumor. A police inspection may be remembered years later with darker details than it had in the moment. Urban legends often grow this way, not from one perfect lie, but from real scenes misunderstood, retold, and placed in the right atmosphere. In the case of Polybius, the materials were already there. Visually intense games, reported illnesses, real inspections of arcade machines, fear of screens, and, in the background, the historical shadow of behavioral experiments. By the time the Polybius story began circulating, MKUltra had already entered public knowledge through investigations, hearings, and declassified material. It involved drugs, behavioral research, and people used as test subjects in ways that later became deeply controversial. There is no evidence linking Polybius to MKUltra, but after MKUltra, the idea of secret experiments on ordinary people no longer sounded impossible to everyone, and that was enough for association to do its work. In 2012 in Brooklyn, someone built a Polybius cabinet for Halloween. It was not the missing machine, not an artifact found in a warehouse, but a modern reconstruction made to play with the legend. Some people recognized the joke. Others reacted as if the cabinet had reopened something. The 2012 cabinet solved nothing. Polybius does not behave like a normal lost arcade game. It leaves mostly reactions: fear, curiosity, uncertain memories, reconstructions, and people still searching after every trail breaks off. Maybe that is why the legend lasts. Polybius did not become famous because someone found it. It became famous because no one managed to close the story. It remains between the game and the suspicion, too fragile to become history, too well-shaped to disappear.